Hi, everyone. My name is Kaylee. As Drew mentioned, I am the media editor at Digiday. I'll be moderating today. I'd like to have the panelists jump on and introduce themselves and just kind of explain what their roles are and what they think maybe is exciting about, college sports. Could start with Gabe.
Thank you, Kaylee. I'm Gabe Gordon. I'm the co-founder of Reach Agency. We are a creative agency for influencer and social video for brands like Clorox, Nestle, and AB InBev. I think what's most exciting for me is for someone who's worked with talent their whole career, having this new group of talent now available for brands to partner with is probably one of the most exciting things that has happened. So.
Great. Rich?
Hi, everybody. My name is Richkolache. I serve as the Chief Revenue Officer at Overtime Sports Incorporated and Overtime Elite, our new professional basketball league for 16, 17, and 18-year-olds. My primary charge in our business is to interface with the top 500 brands we work with in delivering content-led solutions that help them tell their story. It's interesting for Overtime because while we're a publisher, we really operate as an influencer. And the reason why I think today's conversation is so interesting is that when you see athletes given an opportunity to express themselves and their personality through things that sit outside of what they do as athletes, I think that's where the storytelling really begins, and that's what's most exciting to us.
Awesome. And Ryan?
Hello, everyone. Ryan Williams here. I'm a partner at Athletes First. We're a sports representation firm. We represent about 200 players in the NFL. And as it relates to, we're full service, so we do everything from the contract with the NFL teams to endorsement deals with brand partners. As it relates to the NIL space, we've elected to take more of a cautious approach to sort of feel it out. We've helped brands sort of navigate some of their strategies. We've helped players sort of navigate their strategies. We've also sat in the middle between universities and trying to educate them on things to look for and areas of opportunity for everyone that are win-win-win scenarios.
Amazing. If any audience members have a question, feel free to drop that in the chat and I'll try to get to that. But to kick it off, so the NIL kind of law overturn, I think it'd be great to kind of set that up and give a quick history of what happened. Gabe, would you do the honors of giving us some background there?
When the laws were overturned, I think that it opened up the ability for athletes to obviously monetize their name and likeness. That's what NIL stands for, which was pretty big. But I think the thing that we're dealing with now is the rules are still a little bit gray in the fact that the overall rights are open, but the mandates state by state still differ. And I think it's leaving a big gray area, which is being navigated. Sometimes it's being ignored and sometimes it's not being enforced. I guess from my perspective, representing brands in the area, I think one of the bigger questions is, when doing deals with these athletes, what side does the responsibility to follow these laws lie on? Is it the buyer or is it the seller?
Got it. So I'm also curious. So Ryan, you mentioned that you're taking kind of a cautious approach here. Is that because, to Gabe's point, there's that gray area? Is it because you're trying to maybe figure out where that responsibility lies on your end?
So for us, it's a little bit different. We get hired typically when athletes finish their eligibility to navigate their brand, to help them create their brand, tell their brand story, and do it in a way that thinks big picture, not quick, short wins. And so when NIL went into effect, one of the biggest concerns for us was that, the players that the media hyped up as being star players, the feedback we had gotten from NFL teams wasn't consistent. And so what we didn't want to do is go to brands that we are close with or that trust us and pitch a player whose ability to succeed on the football field wasn't comparable to what we were selling. Because some of these relationships we have with brands have existed for 10, 15 years. And so And we've seen a lot of that. I think it's still a win for some of those college players who haven't had success on the football field this year that have cashed out in NIL. I mean, they've made money, which they may never get the opportunity to play in the NFL. And so they've been able to capitalize on it, and it's good for them. And so we looked at it from the standpoint of it's better to be patient and right than fast and wrong. And that's the advice that we give a lot of brands. And if you notice, there aren't brands going full steam ahead. The brands have been pretty cautious in what they do and how they partner up. But it's in the NFL, there's 32 quarterbacks. In college football, there's 112. The pool is just much bigger. And when you have a quarterback who goes number 2 overall from BYU and number 1 overall from Clemson, and Josh Allen from small school, and you have Trey Lance from a small school, you have all these guys going from all these. It's not as guaranteed that a national brand is gonna get a big win if they partner with the biggest name in college sports that the media determines. Guys get hurt, guys get benched and stuff like that. So we were just looking at it more so from the standpoint of, I don't have to be the first to get a bunch of singles and doubles in order to keep our lights on. For us, it's more so making sure that we're advising players the right way, brands the right way, and colleges and universities the right way as well.
Got it. And Rich, I would love to kind of hear about what this change meant for the publishing side of the industry. So when you're looking at new NIL, I guess, brand access, what excites you about that?
I think the most important thing is it's not really about the money. I think there's a lot of conversation around, Kenny Pickett at Pittsburgh getting paid this, or, another athlete getting paid a similar or larger amount. But it's not really about the money. What it's really about is what the opportunity is that we're creating for these young athletes, who presumably have, a long career ahead of them, either as a professional athlete or another industry. And so what it really comes down to is what resources do you have at your disposal to be able to provide to those athletes? So if you think about it this way, when a top high school star is trying to decide between Alabama, Ohio State, and Florida, the reality is the offer is essentially the same. It's a full scholarship to any one of those schools. And independent of the cost of living adjustment that those schools can provide based on their location, the reality is that the compensation is effectively the same. So then it becomes like, well, what are the resources that allow me to develop as an athlete or have a better chance to become a professional that would then separate one school from the other? In a similar vein for publishers, I think anyone can make an announcement saying we're gonna sign all these athletes and we're gonna start paying thousands of different athletes to do things. But if they don't have the resources and they don't have the social following that Overtime does, I think ultimately that athlete is going to be disappointed even if they cash the check, which I'll call post-cash depression. And I think that's a really important point. So for us, it's about lending our resources, our 55 million fans and followers, the 120 million people we reach across social media every single month, the largest sports account on TikTok, over 250 employees, the validation that we get from the Overtime Elite League, where instead of paying for athletes to do things outside of their sport, we're actually paying for athletes to play their sport at 16, 17, 18 years of age. So a lot of different themes I touched on there, but the reality for us, very simply stated, is we have a massive amount of resources. We're going to move, like Ryan said, very strategically forward with a select group, and our announcement around our College Athletes Creator Studio is going to pave the way for those athletes to do things that are really, really large scale that will then meet and service the needs of a big brand.
Got it. And so I want to talk about the actual process of getting these relationships started with the athletes, because I think that there's a lot of questions about, do you approach the colleges? Do you approach the athlete directly? How do you get the ball rolling? And one of the attendees for Rich asked a question in the Q&A, what comes first, pairing the athlete with a brand or a brand with an athlete? And I think perhaps, how do you even get the athlete on board to begin with? I think that'd be a good way to kind of start off that question.
I think, Overtime, again, I don't want to make this all about Overtime, but we do have some unique positioning as it relates to our relationship with high school athletes and eventually their transition to college athletes. And then clearly the ones that make the transition, like Ryan's guy, Justin Fields, who's now, the quarterback for the Chicago Bears after, a stint at Ohio State and at Georgia. But our relationship starts with the athletes and their families in high school. And I think that allows us to create a relationship, which will then allow us to have deeper and richer conversations about content creation. And I think the mapping the athlete to a particular brand or sponsor is something that's really difficult to do in the early days. I think it's better to create, a path for what the story that we're going to tell based on the athlete's talents, their interests, their personality, and then try to match that skill set with an appropriate brand, as opposed to trying to retrofit a brand and make the athlete conform.
Got it. Got it. Gabe, Ryan, I guess I'm curious from your end, working more from the brand and the athlete side. What is the process there? Do you have brands that are coming to you like, hey, the quarterback at Clemson, he looks really cool, I want to know about him? Is it do you ever get those requests, or are you trying to do what Rich said and more so figure out the story before you add in the brand? You can start with Gabe.
Yeah, I can start. Look, I think with the NIL announcement, we had more clients than ever that weren't in sports marketing, that were maybe just in the influencer space, and even brands that weren't even targeting college markets, all of a sudden wanting to do NIL deals. And so we very similar on the brand side took a strategic approach because look, you can do a deal with a single athlete real easy, but in order to actually meaningfully, have relationships with NCAA athletes, and in order for it to really be effective for a brand campaign, we had to take a step back and see what our approach was going to be, what brands it made sense for, and bake that into a normal brand plan, right? What brands do with NCAA athletes shouldn't be measurably different than how they would approach sports marketing if they already had a program or if they already had an influencer program. Obviously, there's customization, but just doing it as a one-off didn't really make sense. So a lot of what we've been doing to date has been education, helping internally, and then helping developing the strategy that you're going to start seeing rolling out next year.
Got it. Got it. And Ryan, so you mentioned working more with the professional level athletes. Is it ever the brands coming to you asking for, an NFL player directly, or do you take a similar approach to what Gabe was kind of laying out and saying, like, it's less about the name that you're working with and more about, what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, and I think that, we take both a proactive and a reactive approach. I mean, I got my start in 2003 by cold calling Campbell's Chunky Soup 37 times to convince them that John Lynch and his mom should be in their campaign. So the foundation for our marketing department back 20 years ago was pitch, 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 pitch. But, a lot of times you don't understand what the brand's goal is, if they want a certain demographic, if they want a certain area. I think in the NIL space, what we've sort of experienced is, more, I tell brands all the time, like, if you're looking for regional deals, like if you're really looking to attack the Columbus, Ohio market because it's a big market for you and the demographics make sense, then Ohio State makes absolute sense in the world. But on the other hand, if you're looking for the star football player, that's where we sort of sit in a really unique spot. We represent the players for their playing contracts. The information, we have a recruiting list of the top 100 football players. That list is cultivated not by the media. It's cultivated by conversations with local scouts, regional scouts, player personnel directors, people actually who are in the know. And so we oftentimes know players that are going to be stars before the media has any idea about them. I mean, I can name a guy, Braxton Jones at Southern Utah right now, that's going to be a top 100 pick. He's an offensive lineman, so obviously not a brand fit, but that's coming through the NFL teams giving us that information or us mining that information from them. And so I've done over 50 Zoom calls with brands and agencies and the like, kind of explaining that if that's your goal, if you want the star player, Nevada has a quarterback who's going to be a first round pick. He could be the second quarterback off the board. He has 5,000 followers on Instagram. Probably not going to be a big, if you're looking for guys because of their social media following, he's not going to be it. But if you're looking for that next Zach Wilson who could rise up the pre-draft charts, Carson Strong's probably going to be your guy, right? So I think our approach has been more so let us help you, advise you on like the athlete side of it. And then if you say, hey, I really want an Alabama guy. Well, we're recruiting 7 guys at Alabama. So my knowledge of John Mechie, who's a wide receiver, who's going to go in the first round. He was born in Taiwan. He lived in Ghana, moved to Canada, went to boarding school at 14, and is now one of the top receivers in the draft, is a lot more intense than an article you may be able to read off the internet. And so we've been more of a resource because from our standpoint, if we help brands make great decisions or agencies make great decisions for their brands, then they're going to be happy with us and want to continue to come back to the well, whether it's NIL deals or whether it's NFL players that they're looking for. Or, I mean, we've also helped the women's sports. I mean, there's been quite a few female athletes that have unbelievable social followings that have been able to use that to their advantage. And again, if the brand is looking for, we had a brand, Sonos, the speaker company, wanted TikTok people. They wanted, TikTok was the audience that they wanted. And so we mined the field of TikTok, female athletes, male athletes, influencers, whatever we could, to give them a sample of athletes, big and small. I have no interest in representing, gymnasts. I don't know that world. But if it comes to a elite gymnast who's a TikTok influencer and it makes sense for a brand, I'll try to put the pieces together so that the brand and that person can have a good campaign.
Got it. And question based off of that. So you mentioned, there's a top 100 pick in, I think it was the University of Utah. You mentioned who has a really small following. So probably, again, not something that you might encourage a brand deal right now. But do you think with NIL, do you think it's worthwhile getting these relationships started while they are, smaller social presences, because down the line, to your point, they might be in the NFL? Do you think it's worthwhile starting to connect the dots while they're in college?
From my standpoint, it depends on the message that you're trying to tell, the story you're trying to tell. So, and I know Rich knows this very well because this is his world at Overtime, but there's a human side to every athlete or every celebrity or, whatever you want to call influencer, that captivates audiences that people care about, and 5 years ago, we started an in-house production company because we wanted to tell some of these stories, and we sold the documentary on Tua Tagovailoa to Fox, and did his story in a big way. But the human interest side, like people watch Hard Knocks not because of the stars, but because they want to see that guy that maybe is on the borderline of getting cut, right? And so there's a way to tell a story that can have an effective reach and benefit a brand if done well. That seems almost seamless, that almost seems like it makes too much sense. Why wasn't this, story told? So again, would I pitch Braxton Jones, an offensive lineman from Southern Utah, to Gillette to be a national spokesperson? Probably not. But if it's a brand that really talks, their brand narrative is, overcoming obstacles and, coming from the bottom to the top and et cetera, maybe there's a branded content piece that sort of can align in the right way.
Got it. And one of the questions that we received in the chat asked, it seems like NIL deals are more of a regional opportunity than a national opportunity at this time. Do you agree or disagree? I'd like to kind of ask the panel that more broadly. Do you think that, maybe some of these guys, like you mentioned, Ryan, if it's a Columbus, Ohio based brand, perhaps they're going to be interested in maybe more exclusive Ohio State partnerships. But other than that, Overtime, you guys are a national publisher. It seems like you're taking this as a national approach. What are your thoughts on this kind of regional versus national, opportunity?
I think one of the clearly stated concerns by Dr. Emmert and the NCAA when they made the concession regarding name, image, and likeness is they didn't want to have it become, war games or an arms race for recruiting. And that's one of the biggest concerns. So if all of a sudden, an automotive group that's in Southern California can pool their resources and make it highly attractive for somebody to come play at USC versus playing at Cal, that kind of sits outside the intention of creating NIL opportunities for athletes. And that's the one thing that I think sits far afield from what we do at Overtime, but it's one that's been talked about and a concern I think that's obvious. Generally speaking, again, going back to the resource point, while I think we've told lots of different stories about lots of different people who have lots of different fandoms, Zion Williamson being one of the great examples where his following was less than 100,000. We started covering him to over 1 million by the time he entered Duke University. That's part of the exchange of value as well, that we want to help grow these athletes' social following. That being said, we do that not to the benefit of a local or regional business, but to the benefit of the top 500 brands that we work with day in and day out, the top automotive companies, the top QSR companies, the top beverage companies, because ultimately that story becomes portable from market to market to market. It's not really about making one Division I football team look better than another Division I football team. It's about telling a story and an athlete's pursuit. And I think what Ryan touched on was really, really important, which is, we want to uncover the story that has drama. One of the most recent features we did with Justin Fields, with Cade Cunningham, had the benefit of both those athletes being drafted in the first round in the respective sports, but each of them had a unique story in terms of how they went from being somebody who was maybe not perceived to be the top player to someone who eventually was given the validation of being a first-round athlete in the NFL and the NBA. And those effectively are the stories we want to tell, because those are everyman stories. And because they're everyman stories, and because we have a massive social footprint, we want to put them on the biggest stage. In order to put them on the biggest stage, we would work with somebody like Gabe or with Ryan and make sure that we had a brand that could leverage that, not just someone who had a specific interest about a specific athlete in a specific geo or DMA.
Yeah, if you look at it, like the core difference between NCAA athletes and the existing population of influencers is most influencers are content creators all day. That's their primary job. NCAA athletes are students, then they're athletes. And so creating content that's needed to develop that off-field personality not only takes a lot of time, but it takes resources. And that's why, rich organizations like Overtime and Ryan sounds like Athletes First is doing this too. They need those resources to help them in that area. And that storytelling is going to grow what their persona is. And then platforms like Overtime are going to help, increase their awareness and raise the equity of the value of their name and likeness.
Got it. And I want to get back into the more human side storytelling end of things that I think each of you had mentioned this at some point. Someone had asked in the Q&A, how do you facilitate telling athletes' stories in a way that's non-interruptive? But I also want to ask a little bit deeper than that. How do you find things to talk about in these brand deals or campaigns or social posts that are not just about athletic skill? Because to your point, like, these people are taking on the roles of being influencers. They have to have passions outside of the game itself. When you're looking at storytelling, how do you find a way to get to the root of who these people are, especially if they are just recently new to the internet stardom, I guess? These are all newer kind of people that you could tap into. So there's probably a lot to learn about them. Maybe Gabe, if you want to start, because we have talked about some of these like alternate passion points before.
Yeah, look, that's crucial for brands, right? Look, certain brands will partner with people who have larger personas and put them in their creative because they want them to be an endorser. They want to have that spokesperson. And that's where, as Ryan was saying earlier, sometimes you get someone that's on the upswing. It's a good investment from a partnership standpoint. But look, a lot of the deals are more social media, based. And for that, for brands, we really look for that off-field persona. What are their passion points? Like, is their talent, is there athletes that just love coffee? Great. We work with Nestle, there's Chameleon, there's Blue Bottle. Are there people that are interested in things that are off-field, like DIY, fashion? Having those passion points are going to be crucial because they're developing who they are as a creator. And what they can lend their credibility to. And that's non-endemic, right? There's obviously a whole endemic category, around being an athlete that I think is core, but there's a huge opportunity outside of that as we learn more about, through storytelling, we learn more about who these people are off the field as well.
Got it. And Rich, I'm curious, because to your point earlier, you talk about kind of, I guess, honing who these athletes are and starting when they're younger and turning them into, million plus followed people online. I'm curious how you go about the storytelling process. And we've talked about this in the past as well, of focusing less of the on the field coverage because there's licensing things that come into play. You don't always get to stream the games, but you do these kind of almost behind the scenes, like who these who these athletes are, have them take you around their college town, what they do in a day kind of thing. What's the process for you in kind of revealing who these people are and identifying brands that might work well with them based on their off-field personalities?
Yeah, I think most athletes will say that, what they do on the field doesn't define them. This goes all the way back to an old Nike campaign with Charles Barkley saying, "I'm not your role model." And I think that statement lives and rings true today, probably even more so than it did then, where most of these athletes will say, look, I have interests that exist well beyond my athletic pursuits, and we find those stories really interesting. The family dynamics they have, the work they do to prepare, how they think, how they love, how they interact. What it really comes down to for us is, athletes as a cohort is just a subset of humanity. Not everyone's a good dancer. Not everyone's funny. Not everyone's beautiful. Not everyone's smart. There's all different walks in life, and as a result, our role as a content creator and a distributor of stories doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a filmed entertainment series like we did with Cade Cunningham or with Justin Fields. So it could be, an athlete who's very, very shy, like Naomi Osaka, who says, I want to do a content collaboration. It could be something as simple as a single image as opposed to a full-length video. It could be a podcast. It doesn't necessarily have to be storytelling in a format that lends itself to Overtime's best interest. It can be a wide range of content opportunities. The same way I would talk about art. Art is not necessarily, painting on a wall. Art can be a million different things. And I think the way we allow these athletes to express themselves and their personality and who they are as a human is really, really what's most appealing and what we've had a lot of success. As far as getting to how we do that, well, that's our secret. We're not going to share that to anybody, but we do it well.
Got it. One of the Q&A questions, though, is asking, what does the college athletes creative studio entail? So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, the College Athlete Creator Studio was an initiative that was brought forward by Overtime as a company to be able to say to the community of athletes who now can benefit from name, image, and likeness freedom, to be able to engage with us and find ways to create this content, to tell stories, and do so in a way that allows them to be, to benefit financially. We've had one announcement very early on with Sayre Wright, who was a high school player from Loyola High School in Southern California, who's now at USC, who also starred in Space Jam 2. We'll have other announcements that are forthcoming in the weeks ahead. But again, our plan was never to say, if there's 10,000 college athletes we could work with, that we're going to work with 5,000 of them. That was never our intention. Our intention was to say, hey, we're creating the studio, and we're going to be very, very strategic in determining who we work with and why we're working with them. And when the time is right for us and the time is right for the sponsors who help us, we'll go ahead and tell those stories in any form that they take.
Got it. And since this panel does focus on social media as well, I would love to talk about kind of what you guys think is the best approach to campaigns that are social first, particularly maybe for athletes that are just starting to build their followings. Is the approach of having, product placement in a post or, maybe a story that's, a day long, is that the best kind of way to dip your toe in the water? Or when you're talking to clients, for example, maybe Gabe to start, do you encourage, something that goes a little bit further than just, dropping a t-shirt on the athlete in a picture?
Yeah, I think, look, social is always a great way to start dipping your toe in the water, right? With anything like this, you want to crawl, walk, run. You don't want to just jump right into it, especially if you haven't been in sports marketing before, or you haven't been targeting the college audience. So I do think it's a great way to start. and the considerations to do so shouldn't be any different. You should be looking at it from both a quantitative and a qualitative perspective. So if you want to do a TikTok campaign, you better hope they have a great following and engagement rate and sentiment on TikTok. If you want to do a YouTube campaign, there's not many athletes that actually have YouTube channels and can program them, but there are. So there's that, but then there's also, again, like, what are they talking about and what are they doing in those? So there are athletes who are really good dancers on TikTok, and maybe that's who you want to partner with. But overall, it really depends on what the brand need is. So if you want to go ladder it back to brand goals, if you are doing an endorsement deal, you are going to want to go with a bigger talent like Shakira O'Neal, that has that larger name recognition. If you want a brand ambassador, you're really going to look for someone who's embodying your brand values and principles. That just happened with Olivia Dunn and flurry, the clothing company. And then I said it earlier, but there's an athlete, Lexi Sun, who loves coffee. So if you're a coffee company, you want to work with them. Again, I think the scale is always relative, but if you're new to sports, social media is a great way to start building relationships with people.
Got it. Ryan, I guess I'm curious, do you kind of think that that's the same kind of approach, crawl, walk, run, test it before you get into it? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I'm a big believer in social. I think social for athletes, from my stance, is it's starting to shift more and more. We're seeing less TV campaign productions and more social activations, branded content pieces, measurable data, I guess, is the big thing. There's a couple ways of looking at it. I advise kids with smaller social media followings. I say, don't be afraid to tag a brand in a post if you really like something. If you like this coffee, make it natural and make it authentic and make it real if you really like it. Obviously, don't be someone who is only posting things about products that they're using. But if there's something you really love, that's one way to get the brand's attention, because there's someone that's monitoring that, and all of a sudden is going to walk into their boss's office and say, hey, this athlete posted this and we should pay attention to it.
That's how we wound up with DK Metcalf and Nesquik, right, Ryan?
Yes, 100%. See, and again, Tyler Lockett with Skittles, it's happened so many times. The other side of it too, that there was a lot of these campaigns going on for a lot of the clothing companies like Sweat Tailor or Built Basics, like a lot of the men's direct to consumer sort of clothing companies, the athleisure wear, the comfort, work from home type stuff. And what we saw that they were doing, which I thought was really effective, is they were partnering with a lot of athletes. And again, they didn't really care as much about their social following, but then they would whitelist them. And in whitelisting them, and we always say that to the athletes, listen, if you get a brand that's willing to whitelist you, sign up all day long, because all of a sudden you're gonna use their media budget to promote your Instagram handle or whatever it is, and you're going to get followers because of it, which now makes you more valuable out there to other brands. And they were super effective, because when you look at it, if you're one of these, if you're Built Basics and you're a brand that uses male models, why not use a male model who happens to be a superstar athlete, who might not have the social media following just yet, but can grow? And if you grow with the brand, then you're in the right spot. And so, we're seeing a lot of that happen now. I'm not as big a fan of just the paid for tweets, just a brand says, hey, we have X amount of dollars and, we want to pay a bunch of guys to do tweets, unless it's surrounding something bigger, right? Or if it's driving traffic to something that makes sense and is something that the narrative makes sense. If you're going to watch a UFC fight and the UFC wants to pay you to promote a tweet, then sure, why not, right? If it's something that's authentic to you. But there was a lot of these early on where brands were just saying, oh, go to such and such restaurant and order this food and send a post. And it's I doubt that guy's really eating that food. And there's no strategy behind where that's going. It posts and then it dies. So, but I think social is a huge playground. I think, it's still yet to develop and unfold. And I think there's limitless possibilities there. And we're big on social around here.
Yeah. And Rich, Overtime is very social native. Your brand was basically brought up through the different platforms. Can you talk about some strategies maybe for authentic social posting and growing personalities through those means as the primary kind of drivers there?
I'd be happy to. I don't want to be repetitive because I thought everything that Ryan said was absolutely spot on for a guy who doesn't live in social every day. He sure knows it inside and out. So I appreciate him sharing that point of view. Really what he's talking about is you have to avoid the sugar high. And the sugar high in social is really easy to get. There's a lot of ways to buy followers. There's a lot of ways to buy views. And there's a lot of ways to make things pop very, very quickly that have the appearance of being impactful. But just like when the sugar high runs off, you kind of feel drained and tired again. That exact same dynamic happens with social media. So everything that we do at Overtime, for every piece of content we create and every single member of talent that works with us, either they're full-time employees at Overtime or whether they're premium professional athletes or college athletes or developing high school athletes, we say the exact same thing to them, which is it's all about the feedback loop through engagement. And ultimately, content that is shared, content that's commented on, that's liked, all these different metrics that reveal engagement, that's really what we're optimizing toward. And I would say that exact same thing to anybody, whether you have 5 followers or 5 million followers, you have to drive engagement because ultimately that's what's going to differentiate you. That's what the algorithm wants to see. That's what the platforms want to see. And whether the viewers say it or don't say it, that's actually what they want to see as well. And I think if you can do it consistently and do it reliably as an individual, that then conveys to brands the confidence to say, hey, I can work with that individual. I don't care if they're 21 or 51. It doesn't matter to me. I've looked at the engagement every time they have something to say or they do something or present themselves or a point of view. It's insightful. It's well choreographed, well orchestrated, well shot. And as a result, the engagement rate was high and that allows them to lean in. And so if you think about Overtime as a brand and we're a caretaker of a brand, what's good for us has to be good for the talent and has to be good for the brand partners we work with. And so it's the exact same dynamic, which is thinking about that engagement, not just views or followers in the abstract.
Got it. And one of the other questions that we got in the Q&A is asking, I think, essentially, why are athletes better influencers because they have the sports tie in? So for people who maybe haven't gone the athlete influencer route, but are curious about NIL because college students reach a younger maybe fan base, college. I went to Penn State, so our football team was like, it was like a celebrity spotting when you saw them in your, comms lecture in the morning. But for athletes, why do they make better influencers than maybe just a traditional influencer who's in the lifestyle space or, someone who's more Instagram native, for instance? I guess, Gabe, I don't know if you have, or yeah, Rich, whoever has a thought on that.
Look, I think, beneath all the social networks is fundamentally a mathematical model that talks about, node and edge connections and the geometric impact that it has whenever you have a sphere of influence over one particular graph that has a connection to another graph. So if you think about Justin Fields as an individual, as a football player, he's also connected to Ohio State, he's connected to Georgia, he's connected to the Chicago Bears, by extension to the NFL and a range of other people. And the reason why the athletes are so compelling as influencer is because of their edge connections to other nodes. And that's effectively how the social graph works. And if you have an influencer, yes, they have an affinity towards fashion, or they have affinity towards music, or they have a following base of, let's say, 5 to 10 million. But if their edge connections aren't as strong, they're not nearly as valuable as someone who has 100,000 followers, but yet edge connections to tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of followers through other nodes. And that's the dimensional reality of the social graph that I think a lot of people misunderstand or misinterpret. And that's why having a relationship with Overtime is so valuable, because our sphere of influence is 55 million, but it's not just the 55 million fans and followers we have, but it's all of our edge connections to the range of brands we work with and all the individuals we work with. And that's, to me, is the reason why these sports athletes, it's not just the newness that they haven't had the opportunity to do this before, but it's because they're so valuable as it relates to the rest of the social graph. that's my perspective.
Yeah.
Gabe, I don't know if you share that.
I couldn't
point of
agree
view.
more. I think to build on it from more of a creative perspective, athletes, I'm saying the obvious here, athletes, professional or college, like they intrinsically are better endorsers for products in certain categories that are associated with performance, nutrition. College, has a whole nother category when it comes to like back to school, that kind of stuff. So there are, I think, certain categories that they can, their value from an endorsement perspective, despite their reach and their audience, will carry additional weight and equity with.
And one thing that I'll just add to that, I had a client one time who dated a celebrity, a TV actress, and every time they'd go to dinner, there would be a paparazzi there. And I said to him one day, I said, you know that the paparazzi's there because her publicist is telling the paparazzi to be there. And he said, that's not true. And so we played a stunt and we told the girl that he was going to they were going to one restaurant and they went to another. And the paparazzi showed up at the restaurant that they initially were intending on going to. And so I finally yelled at the publicist and said, this needs to stop. And her response was, well, so-and-so needs the publicity to stay relevant. And I said, yeah, I know, but my client doesn't. I said, my client throws a football on Sunday in front of millions and millions of viewers. And the NFL is the most popular sport in the US. And it's the, 20 of the top 25 rated programs every year on TV are NFL football games. And so he doesn't need that added exposure. And her response was, well, if the celebrity doesn't manufacture eyeballs, then the celebrity could fall out into irrelevance. Now, as it relates to social and digital and that type of stuff, it's just another touch point, right? Like you're going to watch Justin Fields play football on Sunday, or he's going to be on football, and then he's going to be on ESPN in highlights, and he's going to be in Sports Illustrated and all these other magazines and all these other mediums. And so social gives him another opportunity where if you're a celebrity chef influencer and all you do is operate on one avenue, then you're not going to have as much of a reach. And I think that's one of the reasons why brands are so, why brands enjoy working with athletes as much as they do.
Got it. No, that makes sense. I feel like kind of touching back to what Rich said about these edge kind of interests as well. I always think of like the people who watch the Kardashians, they know some of the basketball players because they're dating the Kardashians, and it kind of branches out into these alternate audiences because of those publicity photos and talking about it on reality TV and all that. So that definitely makes sense. I think one of the last questions I have for you guys is related to age and audience. So we talk a lot about social media and the fact that these are college students. They're naturally reaching people who are their age, 18 to 22, give or take a couple of years there. What's the advantage of working with this cohort of athletes in reaching this younger fan base? Because I've heard from a variety of people that live sports is less consumed by this, Gen Z age group on linear TV, for instance, right? So they're engaging with these athletes in different mediums, perhaps, than, their parents were. What's the kind of age advantage here in reaching perhaps an audience that these brands that are interested in sports marketing might not have been able to reach so easily? We could start with Gabe and then bounce around.
Yeah, I think actually Rich said it great earlier. Like they're extremely relevant talent to that audience, right? And in a way that other existing talent isn't. There are gamers who are of college age. There's lifestyle influencers who are college age. There's travel influencers who are of college age. But having an athlete that is at a college in a certain region is extremely powerful.
Yeah, to me, it's less about their age. It's more about their proficiency in one aspect of their life. And if you think about the litany of Olympic athletes who, for the last several decades, have been able to be spokespeople for a wide variety of products as a result of them being Olympians, it just seems to me like the college athletes have been sequestered or quarantined in a way that is just incredibly unfair. Like they've put in as much time into their sport as any skier or snowboarder has, yet they can't reap the same advantages that Olympic athlete has reaped by virtue of the Olympic movement. And I think ultimately, There's a huge premium on youth, but the real premium in this country is on prowess and proficiency. And I think college athletics as an entity allows a wide range, as Ryan mentioned, 100 and I don't even know what the number of Division I schools is. I think it's 112 Division I football programs can compete every weekend. And people marvel at that. They love to watch the passion, the pageantry, and the energy around these 10,000 athletes who are playing college football. It just creates an immense amount of energy, and the fan base that surround these teams is enormous. And you start putting all these things together, and you say to yourself, here's an untapped resource that checks all these boxes for brands and brand communication. Why wouldn't we take advantage of it? It just hasn't been organized before. So it's up to guys like Gabe and Ryan and myself and our respective companies to pave the path for these athletes to be able to have an opportunity to make money the same way somebody who's playing in the pep band at halftime can go play as a professional musician that night and be paid, but that same athlete can't do that. And that to me is inequity in sports. And unfortunately, because of a number of other factors, it's just been unfair to these athletes. And I think it's time that we try to right the ship and get it back to where it should be pointed.
And the only final thing I'll add is from a brand perspective, and one of the things that I talk with a lot of brands about is, the first time a college athlete, the demographic that they reach is the college that they're at, right? You mentioned you were at Penn State and they were like celebrities there. It's also probably the first time that you ever bought laundry detergent on your own. It's also the first time you ever made like a grocery store run with like your college roommate on your own. And so now you're in a supermarket buying products for the first time ever. And so whereas the buying power in traditional advertising and stuff is usually the female and in the older 25 to 32 or whatever that demographic may be, because that's usually the mom shopping for her kids and her family. If you think about it a little bit differently, like, I started buying detergent as an 18-year-old freshman. If there's a college, if Cade McNown at UCLA, when I was a freshman, was endorsing Tide detergent, it may have had an influence on me that could have created a pattern that existed now when I'm 41 years old. And so there is some truth to that. And there is some, I think that there's opportunity there. To echo a little bit what Rich said too, like it used to be that if you were a Olympic swimmer who also wanted to be a scholarship athlete, you couldn't take money from your endorsers. So like Missy Franklin, she wanted to swim in college. And so she had to forego all of her sponsorship money because she also wanted to swim in college. Didn't really make sense. And to the earlier question about people who are better influencers than they are athletes, previously, if you were a better influencer and you could have reaped a lot of benefits just strictly because you were an influencer and you weren't as good of an athlete, you couldn't make any money before, but now you can. And so, and they should. If you're a really good influencer and a moderate to average athlete, you should still be able to play your sport in college, but capitalize on being in a space that you're far better at than anyone else out there.
Yeah, the only problem with your theory, Ryan, is I was broke in college. I couldn't buy anything, so it didn't matter what detergent it was. I just had to borrow yours. I had no money. I got that stuff that came out of the wall. That soap. I washed my head, my hair, that's probably what happened to my hair. Just all that bad soap I used.
Gabe had the good stuff. That's why his hair.
He did.
I just didn't do laundry.
Awesome. All right. Well, that brings us to the end. Thank you all so much for joining and for sharing these really great thoughts. And thank you to the audience for joining us as well. All right. Yeah, we're good.
Thanks, Kaylee. Gabe, great to see you. Ryan, thanks so much. Thanks for everything.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.